Hello and welcome to this video. I have a guest with me. I want to welcome the
It's
incredible jazz, not Latin. We've just been having a chat, not Latin American musician. He is basically a musician like us all. I want to welcome to this video Mr. Roland Vasquez. Thank you for coming. Now, we've basically we just jumped into this Zoom meeting and we've just kicked off and we've been chatting for like half an hour already, and Roland is covering so much stuff and it's so heavy, and so I've said, look, let's just start rolling. So some of you may know who Roland is, some of you may not. Normally I would do an introduction, but I'm actually not today. I'm going to pique your interest and we're going to open up with a story you just started up with. So let's start in that. Like William Blake said, the whole world exists in a grain of sand. So let's start with your story of getting a phone call from Carlos Santana and just set the scene for me, Roland.
oh well, as I'd said, in 1987, I was introduced to Carlos backstage and gave asked him if I could give him a cassette, a demo cassette of my recent album, and he took it very graciously. And then later on, I got calls from guys that were on the band that knew me. Said, "Man, what'd you do? He's got this thing in his beatbox and won't take it off. It's driving everybody nuts." Well, Carlos, you know, I guess he liked it. And anyway, the next year, the record's out. It's getting a fair amount of airplay. I was teaching then. I wasn't touring in those days. I was in New York and working at Manhattan School of Music. And I came home and there's a message on my machine. It says, "Roland, it's Carlos. Give me a call." And I thought, what the heck? This is one of the cats I'd come up with in East LA, one of the bar band dudes pulling my leg because they're seeing I got, an album out. I didn't think to see with the 415 area code that it was San Francisco. So I returned the call and I was kind of, tired. I've been teaching hello. And I said, "Who's this?" And he says, "Carlos." And I started to say, "Carlos, who?" And it felt like my stomach fell out of my body. I heard and recognized his voice. I said, "Carlos, I'm so sorry." And he said, "Never mind, man. I love your album. I'm digging it, And he talked to me about it for a while. And he said, "Would you ever want to do a project with me?" And my son blames me all the time because I said, "Well, now wait a minute. I would love to play with you. I would really love to write something for you or with you, but I think you need a stadium drummer. You need Dennis Chambers or Dave Weckl or somebody that's going to come and meet your audience with the vocabulary, blah, blah." So I wish I just got on a plane and gone to be around his presence because he is a major light, a person people see as Mexican, but he's an indigenous person, as are most Mexicans, as I am. I'm Chicano, mixed blood, Cahuilla Nahua person. But then, years passed. Like that was 88 when Tides of Time was out. And that's the recording. I think he liked Palladium and the piece Pire that Mike Stern's on. And then a couple of years ago, he was doing a concert in at Central Park. I'm coming home from working at Bard, and I get this phone call from a woman I know who's married to Guy Eckstein, who his dad was Billy,
Yeah,
and his
he's a
brother
good
was
jazz
Ed.
arranger, isn't he, guy?
Yeah, but she said I was just at Carlos' press conference, and he started talking about you. Someone mentioned your name, and she said he went off about your album. And I just started crying because I was like, oh my God, 37 years ago or whatever, I gave him a demo cassette and he still liked the music. So there must have been some, like you talked about, the continuity, the ethos of the continuum of energy and the dialogue between the states of mind that lead us forward into organizing ourselves, representing language, representing literacy, and becoming culture. But I was blessed. I'm still blessed by the idea that someone who's given so much music, he changed my life. And that's a whole other story from a real bad period in 1969 when I heard Soul Sacrifice. I was like, I couldn't hear it enough.
I mean, I just love music because it's there's a power to it that is so obvious, but because it's so obvious, sometimes you can't see the wood for the trees because it's so obvious. So the reason why I'm talking to Roland now, from my point of view, is I think I know about jazz fusion and jazz rock. I know it all. I'm on the channel saying it, and then I have people watching the channel and they go and check this album out, go and check this album out, and I get that all the time. And at some point, someone said, "Go and check this album out by Roland VAZQUEZ called The Urban Ensemble." And as soon as I put it on, I just was blown away by it. Now, as soon as we started chatting together, I said, because as soon as me and Roland started chatting off camera, within about 1 minute, we're talking about metaphysics, we're talking about spirituality, we're talking about the great dialectic, we're talking about the communication. He's talking about the sort of the history of pain, of torture, of the cultures, producing great art, but the culture's also being destroyed and wiped out, and all. And I'm thinking, my God, and I'm just nodding away, going, God, this is where I'm coming from. But the reason why we're talking is not because of all that highfalutin stuff. It's because that urban ensemble album grooves. It
Oh,
kicks so hard. And I'm a drummer and I recognize it. It's like as soon as I heard it, and when the soloing comes in, the soloists fly. Nothing's holding them back. It's your album. You didn't say, "Oh no, just do 8 bars." You're letting the musicians fly. You're letting the musicians express yourself. And I thought, this guy is an incredible composer. He's a incredible band leader. What the hell is this album? Where's it come from? So let's backtrack. Who are you, Roland? How did you end up making this incredible album?
well, I told you I was raised by my mom, adopted Scots Welsh person who kept Coltrane and Miles and took me to meet Errol Garner and Mongo Santa Maria and Ahmad Jamal. I met Errol when I was 6, and he put this big hand to me and said, "Do you like my music?" I couldn't even speak. And then on my 12th birthday, I saw Mongo at the Lighthouse, and I saw a whole room full of people who were of different colors, all happy, all just feeling joy and grooving and moving. And Mongo, who I followed for many years because of different connections there, and Ray Maldonado, who was with him on trumpet, became like a mentor. He bought me my first Rogers bass drum pedal. And then later, when he was with Stevie Wonder, stayed at my house there in LA. I had a band house and I would drive him to rehearsal. That's another story about my experience with Stevie and Ray. But I started playing in my garage, my drum set, trying to teach myself beats. The Kinks were one of my records, along with Grown Up All Wrong, 12 by 5, and but also listening to Mongo and James Brown, trying to get some of those grooves. I wound up in rock bands, and in my first real professional gigs were in East LA with guys doing stylistics and the whole melange. But that environment was really tough, and there was a lot of sadness and depression and violence there. And I used to listen to the jazz station every night when I'd come home, and there was this track, First Light by Freddie Hubbard. And I had this epiphany that was like, my God, somewhere there's people that are making this music that's all about lifting. I mean, to me, I tell my students, listen to the George Benson solo. That's one of the great guitar solos in the
That
jazz
album's an
literature.
incredible album.
It every time I hear it, it fries me. And I didn't even know until this last year that Freddie won a Grammy for that. But so 1972, I'm on the road with a bunch of Chicano brothers. We're up in Sacramento, and I meet these guys. I said, "You got to listen to this," and they play me. I sing the Body Electric, and I said, That's that must be all overdubs. That's not." And they said, "Dude, they're playing this weekend down at Berkeley Amphitheater. You want to go?" So I found myself in the front row at the concert that it was the Hoodoo Rhythm Kings with, I think, Ishmael Wilburn on drums and Miles Davis. Miles had his foot up on a chair, and Michael Henderson and Tume, Sonny Fortune, who I met when he was with Mongo. And then Weather Report came. And I was in the right at holding on to the
With
stage.
a
And
ridiculous gig to sing. I mean, what was
goodbye.
Miles like?
Miles was, he wasn't really that connected, but they were grooving. They were
Yeah.
playing on the corner kind of stuff, and I was
Mm.
okay, okay. But before, I mean, weather reports experience, all I can tell you, and it's a story in itself. It affected me so much that after the show, I jumped over the police barricade and walked into their green room. I'm a guy with, in those days, I had hair. I'm in a checkered suit. And of course, in rock in those days, that's what we did. You just walked into somebody's dressing room and said, "You guys are awesome," and blah, 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 blah. Well, I come in the door and there's Gavat and Miroslav, and they said, "Can we help you?" Next thing you know, there's Wayne comes over, and the three of them. I felt like I was with three angels. I couldn't. I mean, I'm a talker, but I could. I was just, and Wayne was just so kind and sweet. And then all of a sudden, this voice from the back of the room happens, and here's his head brushing his teeth, and he says, "Get this MFer out of here." Which that happened again at the 8:30 recording session because I was there at both Peter and Jocko had asked me to come down.
Yeah.
It happened to me twice when Zawinul said, "Get this guy out of here."
Well, apparently that's what he said to Jacko when he first met him as well, wasn't it? Backstage, and Jacko was trying to give him a tape or something, and he said,
Oh,
"Get the F out of here." So
yeah,
you're in
yeah.
good
Well,
company. So you knew Jacko, did you?
oh yeah, yeah. He used to come to my gigs at the Baked Potato. I think I had some pretty good bass players across those early years. You talked about Urban Ensemble. I mean, from Abe Laboriel, who was on that record, Kenny Wild. Then it was Jimmy Johnson and Nathan East on the next record. When Nathan was playing with us at the Potato, people, everybody was coming down to hear this guy. And one night, in front of the stage was Jocko, Joni Mitchell, and Bobby Colomby, and on the other side of the stage, over by the drums, were Maurice White and Verdine. They were there, and
And this
it
all
was
makes sense because I know the circle of, because this is the point where Maurice White has set up his own sort of experimental
Cavallo
label, hasn't he?
Ruffalo.
Yeah.
That album, yeah, they had a studio. That's where anyway.
It's
But
that Mr.
Jocko,
Gone period, isn't it?
oh yeah. Well, um, yeah, I think
89.
so. I mean, my experience with Weather Report was I saw the band I think at the Pasadena Civic with Manolo and Alex and Jocko. That's the first time I saw him. But that happened after my experience doing my first demo at Wally Hyder. My percussionist, the late Hector Andrade, he's actually playing congas in that picture I sent you of the Claire Fisher band with Alex on timbal. He says, "My buddies want to come to our session. What do you think?" And I'm like, "Oh my God." I said, "This is my first demo, and they want to bring in a bunch of crazy Latin percussionists." And I said, "Okay." Anyway, we're recording, and all of a sudden the door opens, and here comes these two guys. Again, they were two light beings. They brought so much energy. I stopped the session and went to the piano and wrote the piece Pire, that was a reflection of the chi and the spirit that Alex and Manolo brought to the room. That tune became our closer for 25 years. Manolo recorded on Urban Ensemble and all those. We did 25 tunes in that session. I can tell you about some of those other songs,
Well,
but
can I ask you some questions here? Because I've got, I've just done a history of Weather Report, and the
yes.
thing that really struck me was the magic when Alex Acuna moved on to drums and the way he played with Jacko, and then the fire of Manolo Badrina. And of course, it only exists on the one album, and it's the one album that went, ballistic, heavy weather. That lineup was short-lived. And Manolo Badrina brought an energy to that band, and I thought, what happened here? And so you start to dig, and obviously he was kicked out of Weather Reports, and all you can really find out is it was not for musical reasons, and I can see it wouldn't have been for musical reasons. So, do you know why he was kicked out of Weather Report?
Well, Manolo is a very inner directed guy and very flamboyant. I mean, one of the stories that Alex told me when we were, because Alex and I played together for 3 years with Salsa Picante, and at the Baked Potato one night, he's telling me about how Manolo, they were playing a show in Italy, and some gangs started fighting in the front of the stage, and somebody fired a gun, and Manolo grabbed a microphone and went to the front and started cursing everybody out in Spanish, and they stopped. But Manolo's very spiritual. Now, there is a wonderful video that I got to share with you of Alex talking about his experience coming to Weather Report. And he says, well, Manolo, when he came to audition, was all in white because he's a Santero, a follower of Santerismo, the religion. It's a pantheistic religion that is actually monotheistic. Anyway, I'm going to go off about that. But Manolo, I mean, when he was fired, he came back to LA and wound up playing with us. And
And he
his,
got a
his
deal, didn't he? And he put out he put out a solo album which I've delved into, and you can see the label chucked a lot of money at it. And I think Jacko's on that album, isn't he?
I'm sure,
But he
yeah.
didn't really do that well. And I mean, I thought he was so charismatic, such an incredible player. It was interesting that he never really got that sort of.
Well, but that's the record business. I mean, Andy, what is doing well? Urban Ensemble was number 5 in airplay when it was out. That was the first recording I made. I could tell you stories about what the retail guys told me, what they expected me to sell. I said, "There's no way this is going to sell that." It's my first time in the studio. It needed to be produced by somebody like Narada, that knew how to.
Could you tell me a little bit about that album and how it came about and what you were doing before? Because you've got, I mean, you're going to have to come back because you just have a raft of stories, and it's just, I mean, you're right in the middle of this incredible time in American music where, for some reason, the companies wanted to put money into actual creative music. Limitless music, and that's an incredible thing. And it brought up these characters that go way beyond the music, like you say, these light beings. And I've always felt Manalo Badrina is one of those.
And
And I
so's
always
Alex.
felt that thing on Heavy Weather when you get that say, "Oh man,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
bit
Well,
that he
that
does."
was a live concert.
Yeah,
That was that energy, and Joe had
yeah.
the perception to say we got to put this on the record.
We got to show what we've got here. And then Alex Akun. I mean, God, that guy. I mean, percussion or drums. I mean, I, he- I when I listen to Heavy Weather, and he does solos on the album. It's a million selling album, and Alex Kuda's doing drum solos, and they're just on fire. He is just such a ridiculous drummer and percussionist. I mean,
It's a spirit. He plays from his spirit. He's indigenous. I believe, I will assume it's Quechua is the heritage from the Peruvian native people. And he brings that understanding and the continuity. Those were the people that became the Inca and the wisdom that was there. But he has such deep wisdom in his playing and the continuity and the spirit, the kindness. I mean, a raft of stories about him and studio experiences. He was the only drummer that ever played on my music until I called Ignacio to play on the big band record. And we were doing a session and there was something not locking in the groove between me and Jimmy or somebody. Jimmy Johnson was playing bass. And I said, well, let me check this out. And I went in the booth and I walk in the door. I told the engineer, roll tape. And I gave him a count off. And Alex sight read the piece Somewhat Others. He sight read it. That's one take. That's what he played the first time he played through the tune. It's on the Feel Your Dream album. But Alex was so gracious and such a giving teacher and accepting. I mean, I don't think I was the best drummer to probably be with Salsa Picante, but Claire, for whatever reason, I used him on my urban ensemble sessions. We did 25 tunes in 7 weeks. I fell into a situation when I came home uh, from, I went to Europe by myself after I had gotten a grant, an NEA jazz performance grant in 1977. And we did 9 concerts for $3,500. And it was like, I saw that people would respond to this music. I was ready to give up. And then I went and was in Greece and somebody put my demo tape on the sound system. And I saw these kids from all over the world, like reacting to the music. Never said it was my music, but I thought I can do something. The attitude was changed when I came back to the States and this financial situation evolved and the studio said, sure, we'll let you record and you come in here. So I got busy, talking to my players that have been playing in my band. We'd been working a lot. We played a lot of gigs in LA in those days with the octet. And One night I'm standing outside the Roxy waiting for a Jack DeJohnette show, and I look up and who's standing next to me but Herbie Hancock. And I said, "Excuse me, sir, but I'm a drummer, composer. Can I give you a cassette?" He said, "Sure." 3 days later, I get this phone call. He said, "Hey, man, who wrote that music?" I said, "I did." "Well, you're a keyboard player, right?" I said, "No, I'm a drummer." And he was so sweet. And I said, "Excuse me, Herbie, but we're getting ready to go in the studio. Would you consider playing with us?" And he said, "Well, let me look at my schedule and I'll call you back." So a day or so later, I get called back. He said, "Look, man, I'm booked those days. Why don't you try Patrice?" So what I did is I used Larry Williams, who's a soloist on Flowered Pig, the tune you like.
Yeah.
Claire Fisher, I called him. He said, "Show me your charts." I went to his house. He said, "Okay, let's go." And Patrice Rushen was the same thing. As a result of that, I think I'm not sure if it was Herbie, but they said, call Benny Maupin. So Benny Maupin comes and plays on a couple of tunes. He plays on "She Might Be Spring." He plays soprano. And that experience was heavy because he looked at me as he takes the horn out of the case. He says, "John said this one is hard to keep in tune." I said, "John?" And he just looked at me. But that
I
soprano
knew
was given
exactly
to
who
him
you
by
meant.
John Coltrane.
Yeah. Wow.
So, but
So he's
anyway,
playing Coltrane sax on your album.
yeah, it was a gift. Coltrane gave it to him.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah, it was amazing. He was
What were the
so
sessions like for that album? Because there's something magical. I mean, did it seem like that to you that they were magical? There's a vibe on that album that's incredible all
well.
the way through it.
I one night, one night I was so stressful because I'd never had that much responsibility for that many, that many players and that kind of budget to get it done with the time that we were given. I was recording as fast as we could, and I was under such stress that I sat up in bed one night, according to my girlfriend, and said, "Just play the notes." But we got it done. We
Yeah.
got it done. And there's some. I mean, I think the unedited Visitor recording, the thing where Ralph Rickert plays that trumpet solo. It's
Yeah.
Patrice on piano, Ken Wilde on bass. It's the greatest solo that's on any of my albums. It just flows, and it's. GRP, when they put the record out, they chopped it up, but I didn't have a label. We recorded in November 77. It wasn't until 1978 that I was able to, here I happened by accident. I got word back from GRP. I had sent them an early demo tape. They were trying to find me. Of course, I didn't have my phone number on the demo tape, and they tracked me down through my mom. And so I called them, and they came and saw the band and said, "We want to do something." And I said, "Well, here's all these tunes." So they needed somebody to come in and take up some slack for overspent that they'd done on
Mm.
Angie Phil and their new album, their new label.
Oh God,
So it
yeah,
was
they spent a
perfect.
ton on that album, didn't they? Yeah, I've read about this with your GRP right in the early days, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, you don't want to know what I got for that record, but let's just say it was, if it hadn't been for the fact that I told them no when they wanted my publishing, I wouldn't have seen anything. It would have cost me to make the record. But it was a blessing, and I had no idea that it was going to have that kind of response from media. In those days, there was commercial jazz stations.
Mm.
That record was, I said it tracked number 5, and they were paying royalties in those days for airplay, which that's gone
So
now.
when that album came out, how did it sell?
Well, my understanding is in worldwide it might have sold between 12 and 15,000, but then Dave and Larry chose not to go on, and maybe that's where I made a mistake, not sharing my publishing with them.
Mm.
But they, Clive came out to see us, came up on stage and took my hand. He said, "I wish you all the success." And when I wrote him and said, "Are you going to pick up the option?" He said, "We're ready, but it's up to Dave and Larry." But they had Tom Brown, and they knew that Tom Brown record, Funkin' in Jamaica, was going to sell. And it did 90,000 units out of the box, is my
Yeah.
understanding. So we didn't have a chance, and it's fine. I mean, like we talked about, life it's a circle. It's not a straight line, and success is something that has to do with breathing and remaining in your shoes and remaining in your consciousness and maintaining the dream. because that's where the creativity comes from. I told you, as a native person, I didn't even recognize myself. I didn't grow up with my brown and red relatives. I grew up with my mom, and my daughter said, "Look, dude, what are you doing? You have a number with the BIA. Why aren't you paying attention to your heritage?" And then I started suffering with that and saying I'm not worthy because I didn't grow up on a reservation. I didn't suffer that way.
And
But
you
then I
do you
saw
think
that my
is that what the story that we started out with when Carlos Santana calls you up and you don't end up going? Is it that insecurity that really was behind that?
oh, I mean my dad, left when I was 3. I mean, my mom raised me, and she had a lot of, she had enough love to keep me on the planet,
Mm.
and did her best. And it's like, but the insecurity and the struggle that they'd come through, each of them in their own ways during the depression, I mean, it was unbelievable. My dad came back from the Philippines and had health issues from his experiences there that, wound up taking his life. But he couldn't accept that I was in music for any other reason than sex. And I said, Dad, in the rock world, that's one thing. The, the gender changes when you're playing fusion. It's mostly guys that are standing
Well,
there.
you've never played progressive rock like me.
Well, I don't know.
I,
I've
I
been
used to
playing.
joke, the one thing you'll never hear at a prog gig is all the guys put your hands in the air. Yeah, all the oh, hang on, sorry.
Oh, that's funny. Well, I understand from my friends in trio speak that are a tremendous drummer, and the research I've done, I can't wait to hear your playing and your music. It's
I'm
like,
not that good. I mean, yeah, it's I'm good for around here, but it's like you're talking about
no,
people.
no. Listen, you're good because of the light that lives in your heart that comes out through your hands. That's the only reason any of us are any good. And some of us know that light's there and we practice that expression. And some of us are struggling with saying, well, I'm supposed to be making this much money for the gig, or I
Mm.
don't, my endorsement didn't show up, and all that stuff impacts all of us, and you're given so much in the way you talk about this music, which I'm in a situation as an educator, and I've been teaching. I started at Manhattan School of Music in 1988, was at the University of Michigan. I taught at Vassar. I've done clinics all over the world, but we're losing literacy, Andy. People are coming to college that can't read a chart, and they're just listening to drum machines, and there is no breath in drum machines. There just isn't. There is breath here. There's breath here. There's heart. Marcus said when they took the drum set, this is Marcus Roberts in my class, he said, when they took the drum set off the stage, they took the backbone out of the music. And I said, they took the heart.
See normally in an interview at this point, we've covered the your this album that I think is a wonderful album. And,
Thank you.
and and part of the reason it's wonderful for me because it really captures a certain time in music, a certain production approach, probably more people in the room at the same time, no computers putting people in, and all that bit. So tape, things being warm, all that stuff that I love is on that album. You've carried on and done a whole host of albums. I've listened to them all now. They're all wonderful. There's no duds there, and they all explore different areas. Some of them are very subtle, some of them are quite small, some of them are very big. You've got, big bands, you've got like this, and I suggest that all the links are down below for Roland. Go and check it all out. Go and
Oh.
listen to all the albums, but first off, go and listen to that Urban Music Ensemble because it's just groove. It's funky. It's like Earth, Wind and Fire. It's like somewhere between Earth, Wind and Fire and John Coltrane. It's somewhere in between. I love Earth, Wind and Fire. I put that Verdine White, that bass player. God, it's like I feel strongly that music is as spiritual as Coltrane is. It's the same thing to
Yes,
me. And
it's
one of
gospel.
the things you started to talk about, and it did blow me away a little bit, I know, was the experience you had when you had an operation, and not an operation when you had a heart examination. Could you tell us a little bit about there? And we'll go there now. So chaps, people. If there are any ladies watching, we're now going to get heavy. I've done enough to cover roll and stuff, but this guy's more interesting than just
Oh.
telling you about all his stories about hanging out with famous people like Jaco Pastorius and Joe Zawinul.
Mm.
So we're going to get into the heavy stuff now. So can you tell us about this experience you had, the breath and the heartbeat?
Okay, well, this I teach the Afro-Caribbean percussion, and I'm not a conga player, but I've brought my hands to a point where I can say what the roots of basis are. But what I saw, to go back to that heart test, I'm laying there on the table. They were just doing, they have to test you before you have certain kind of surgery, and they were making sure that I was, being that I'm an older gentleman, that I was up to it. And I'm hearing this gagung, gagung, gagung. And I'm saying, well, so that's the best I got is a lame shuffle. But as they move the wand up the heart, the light started changing from red to different colors. And there were these other harmonics that were in there. And you start hearing the gung, gung, uh, da, 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 da. And I started hearing the 12/8 stuff. And I thought, oh my God, every time I'm watching African villagers dancing to their sacred music, they're reinvigorating themselves. I had had some experience working before that surgery crisis with a Tai Chi master who was helping me, keep my body aligned. And he said in the Taoist medicine from thousands of years ago, the belief is the root of the earth is infinite energy and the heavens are infinite harmony, and where they meet is here in the center. And then the idea of this
We can't hear
the
it, of course,
two.
because Zoom, but I can see
Oh,
visually that Roland's playing a three against two polyrhythm,
and the
which sounds
two,
very academic, doesn't it, when you describe it like that? A three against
well,
two polyrhythm.
it's the
But
universal body clock, Andy. It's the song that every person that ever lives heard in their mother, where the breath is a two in and out, and the heart is a three. And that asymmetrical relationship is always moving forward. When you listen to Bembe time, that the 6/8, the 12/8, that's the sacred music, rhythmic music for the cultures that came from West Africa that live here in Cuba. It's called by a different name, candomblé in Brazil, and it's the essence of it is the power of the rhythms, two rhythms. And West African music usually has both the three and the two. You listen to Rumba Colombia, it's the three and the two, and the way they do this. So what we see is this clock that's in all beings, which is the groove of two against three. And that's a whole subject and way of elaborating. But I get the students, most of them non-musicians, to at least articulate a two against a three on a drum, because the drum is a universal, infinite mirror that always tells you the truth. You cannot lie to a drum. You're either ready or you've prepared something, or you're listening or you're not. And so as we learn about the groove, you talk about the groove. Well, the groove is the manifestation of the internal body clock manifesting outward in terms of performance or in terms of participation. What really matters is when we look at the ancestral communities, the ancestral ceremonies, the ancestral culture and language. We're seeing sharing, we're seeing equity, we're seeing harmony, and we're seeing acceptance, which this is something that exists in all people, but we've forgotten as we've been commodified and compartmentalized away from cultural experience. I saw it when I was in East LA. I felt it. It's the first time like I felt like I belonged was when I went to play with those brothers down there on Whittier Boulevard. First they said, "Who is this?" They called me a patty dude because I look white. But when I played, all of a sudden I became part of the brotherhood of this music. And you feel that if you let yourself, when you go to hear rumberos, when you sit, if you can go and sit with a folkloric group that's playing and just be quiet and let how they're talking to each other through the drums, through the clave, which the clave is the singular manifestation of the three against the two. And that's
Singular.
a
Yeah.
universal.
Yeah. I I don't know what to start with all that. I'll have to clip all that bit as well and put that as a separate
Fine.
little video because that's this is a revelation, and it's a revelation I've had as a drummer and a musician and a painter at one point, and now a YouTuber. That in life there is always a conflict between two things, and they're actually often these two things relate to each other. In philosophy and logic, they would call it thesis and antithesis as the thing, or yin and yang. There's a
Yes.
dialectic that is always at play. And I think the important thing about art is art unifies that dialectic and it does it in an infinite set of ways. Now, the thing that you brought to me today is actually saying that if we look into our being, our very being, the very first bit of perception that we ever had, and we think of our mother's heartbeat and how that heartbeat is keeping us alive and what it means, it's the absolute at that point when your consciousness first switches on. And this is so simple that dum da dum, da dum, da dum, da dum cannot be straight. Now, for non-musicians, I'm now going to do this straight. So if it was straight, it would be like one e yonder, two e yonder, and it would be dum, da dum, da dum, da dum.
Uh,
And it's not, is it? That's not.
I think it's a triplet. I
Yeah, it's a
think the
triplet, but
jazz
it's sort
feel
of
that
ba ba ba
it
ba 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 ba.
got, 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 got,
Yeah,
got,
trouble if we're
got,
not in sync. I
got,
wish we
got,
were.
got.
I would love. I mean, we could do a whole video, you and me. I mean,
I'm coming to your
I have.
house.
I mean, I'm sat in the UK over here, but I know exactly what you're talking. Now, the next week, because we can't. Nobody can hear anything. I'm thinking, how can I explain this to the audience? The rhythm that the next rhythm along for me is this one. Da 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 da. If you just sing that rhythm there, which is what I call an inverted three over the two, the three, the one of the three is not on the beginning; it's on the next one along. Ba ba da 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 da. So that inverted three over two rhythm, when you sing it, you'll feel that the breath, but you will also feel the heartbeats, and it's almost like the head and the heart that you're discussing. It's almost like the thing that I have said on my channel, which is comes from a completely different angle. That all art is the sublime balance between hedonism and perfectionism, or the emotional, or the visceral, the body and the mind, however you want to see it. Apollo and Dionysus. And I thought for years that when I hear a groove, if you listen to a drummer and you listen to Bernard Purdie or Steve Gadd or John Bonham or whoever it is, they groove and you recognize that groove because it's so subtle and it has to be absolutely precise to work. But at the same time, it represents them. John Bonham's groove is not Purdie's groove, and that's not Jeff Porcaro's groove, and it's not Elvin Jones's groove or Max Roach's groove. And this, as a drummer, we value this so much, and it is the backbone of all music. But what I find fascinating is somebody who's come from that, same as I am. I'm a drummer, right? And all the best musicians are drummers. Charlie Parker was a drummer.
Jocko,
Jacko was a drummer, and even if
Becker.
they don't play the drums, they're still a drummer. Monk was a drummer. Cecil Taylor was a drummer. Without a doubt, Cecil Taylor's a drummer. I used to say this to my students, and if you want to improvise, the first thing you got to nail is the drum aspects. Don't worry about the notes. The notes come secondary. The first thing is the rhythms and get a groove. You can play anything if you believe in it enough. It's true. You can play anything if you believe in it enough.
Andy, Andy, the rhythm is the flow. Joe Zawinul said, "Rhythm isn't time; it's melody." And the rhythm is the flow. The notes are the targets. They're targets, but your flow is your internal rhythm, and it's really the rhythm of your consciousness. But your mind and your body are the duality that keep it in one place.
This is
So
fascinating, Rob, because if you look at education, I've taught for 30 years, right? The students get obsessed with the notes and they all start talking. They go, "What are you doing there?" And they want to know why that note works. You know that thing when they get into that thing. They go, "So why can you play F sharp over a major? Kind of don't understand, and all that bit." And I say the problem is the problem is you're seeing the notes as targets. I said you're seeing what you're playing as ducks in a row, and you're at the fairground. And you try to shoot them
Ah,
down.
beautiful. Yeah.
And I was very influenced by Zen and the Art of Archery, that book, because if you want to hit the target, you've got to learn. After you've learned all the technique and skill, you've got to then learn to. You've got to try and miss that target. You've got to have that feeling like that thing where you, as a joke, you scribble a bit of paper and you throw it over your shoulder, and it just happens to go in the bin, and you go, "Why did that go in the bin?" That feeling there when you get it in the bin without trying, it's what you were aiming for as an artist. When I was at art college, my this painter was really well known. I was painting away, and he came up to me and he goes, "When you make a brush stroke," he said, "you must be like a squirrel jumping from branch to branch." He says, "If you fall, you will die, but you cannot have no tension in that jump. You just do it." And he said, and that is the terror of the situation of being an artist. And there again is the dialectic. And so I know I'm going on about it, but I'm going on it to get my ideas down because
Please,
I've
please.
learned something from you, Roland, that it's embodied in groove. Fundamentally, it's embodied in groove. And then the notes being the targets, that all comes up and above, and you can go out and around, or arrangement's another thing, isn't it? A, B, verse, chorus, middle section, all that. But at the end, when we all sit down to write something, it's always the groove that you try to get first, isn't it? It's always, it's so hard to put into words. How did you become a composer then?
I don't know. I mean, when I was playing in East LA, I'd come home at night and lay there and listen to Bartok, Stravinsky, Mozart, uh, and cry because I thought I can never imagine sequences of beauty like that. But uh, there was an experience I had at the end of my rock and roll days where the jazz band from Westminster College, which is well, they had a program that came out of Dr. Bill Fowler's work at the university, and the Fowler brothers were there. Albert Wing was there. My buddy, who I'd grown up playing in funk and soul bands, Cliff Hugo was playing bass. They were at Dante's. I heard that band and I heard all that. Bruce Fowler, Wald Fowler, they were just unbelievable. I went and gave notice at my rock band, put my clothes in my car, and drove to Utah and said I want to go to school. But it's like when I got there, there was an open, clean slate, and I found in a basement apartment. I said I'm going to write 10 tunes, and I'm going to, and it was like, and when I have 10, then I'm going to call those guys and see if they'll play my music
Well,
with
how
me.
did you develop the skills to write? I mean, did you study piano, and how
Well,
did
I
you know about
tried
the
to learn
notes?
piano. I did some study of, form and analysis, but I couldn't take dictation, but I understood the Bach and the Beethoven and how they were connected. Then I met this guy named Merv Kennedy, who my friend Cliff Hugo, the bassist, was with. He taught me about 251. He was a vibroharpist who taught music theory in a shed behind a music store in Sierra Madre, California, which, I grew up in Altadena. And but Merv showed me the chords, the fourth chords with a third on top, the relationship of, and I was like, oh my God, it's all right here. And I could understand it. And so that allowed me to start doing some other things with writing. But writing for me was what I put on paper, shared with players, had a cassette player to record to listen to. And the cassette player taught me, oh, that sounds horrible. That really sucks. Or, oh, that works. And I went that way. But then I did study, I did transcriptions. Palladium, I transcribed in grad school. I transcribed what they played. It took
Your
me like
version
three
of
days.
it's incredible. That's another thing you've got to check out is Roland's version of Palladium by Weather Report. It's absolutely beautiful.
Well, thank you. I know poor Mr. Shorter heard it a lot when it was being played on Carlos's beatbox on their tour. I never heard a word from him about it. So I hope wherever he is, I showed respect because that's all I felt in hearing that music of just the beauty of the chords, the momentum, everything. And And it's like the ear teaches us about composition, just like the eye and the spirit teaches us about color and paint and perspective. And if we're listening, it's gonna come out. And then the stories, the dreams, the visitor, that piece, that was an experience I had. I was mowing my grandmother's lawn and feeling sorry for myself. And I started hearing the ostinato bass, the dun 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 dun. And then I had this image of a teacher that came, a wayshore, which was the picture was the bottom triad, which was a second inversion triad, like a C, an F, and an A. And on top of that was an extension which was at the relationship of a fifth. So it was an F, a B flat, and a D. And that the image of that melody section, which had block voicings and then some weird inversions, just showed up in my mind. And I've only had a few pieces where I saw the notes and I went in and figured it out at the
I've
piano.
had that
But
happen as well because I write and I very like if I'm really intensely working on stuff and I get into a certain place and then I'll think, oh, I'll go up the shop and get some biscuits or something like that. So I'll go up the shop and as I'm walking up, and this never normally happens, a lot of my stuff's made out of improvisation and I improvise like Zao and I'll improvise and then go, what did I just do? Oh, I like that. And with computers, it's much easier. Just cut that bit of chords out. But every now and then I get a thing where it just drops in from nowhere and it's the whole tune finished. And it's like architectural. You go, these notes start here, there's that riff, it's going to move up in minor thirds, and every time those chords will move at that point down, and it goes like this, the drums will come in at that point, and the whole thing just drops in, but it happens like about once a year. And
well,
if you don't
put
run
it,
home and get it down, it's like you forget what the reason why you thought it was so great.
sing it into your phone. I tell my students, use
Yeah.
your phone. Just sing something in the phone or sit down and play what you can of it, because then you can go back to it. But it's like the image of the notes is like the image of a painting. And the composition teacher Ludmila Ulela, who was head of comp at Manhattan for 40 years, she really mentored my ex-wife. But I took her class for non-comp majors, and she said a painter really never finishes a painting. They're always looking at it, say, oh, that could be a little bit of this, a little bit of that. So always be willing to look at your work and see where there can be improvements. I had one private lesson with her. It was a gift from my ex-wife. And I brought my scores and my recordings. She just went like this through the page. Oh, that's interesting. Kept going. She said, there's a blackboard, a piece of chalk, write a melody. And I was like, what? She said, yeah, write me a melody. She says, the only thing is no bar lines and no vertical consideration. I want it to be line. So I worked for 3 months to write a solo clarinet piece, which has been played once or twice. But you learn, and then the elements of structural possibility present themselves. So since that lesson, I don't think any of my pieces that were written have the same treatment of the melody after the solo section or the same harmony or the same form. I always try and freshen things. Excuse me. So much of the music, pardon me, that we're hearing, especially at education level, play the head, get done with as fast as you can, then let me practice my scales, and then we'll go back and play the head the same way. Why would you do that in the 21st century? Why wouldn't you evolve? You go to a movie, you don't want to see the first half hour a second time. You got to take
You
the
know,
thematic material.
do you know where I got this from? I got exactly the thing you're from a track by Weather Report called Unknown Soldier. Because Zawinul states it, it starts off at home. That whole triptych-like structure of that tune
Uh,
is basically the fundamentals of harmony because it starts at home, it goes out to war, and then it comes back home. But when it comes back home, it's colored by the fact that you've gone out to war. So you cannot return to home and it be the same way. And then I remember reading an interval with Miles Davis, and he said, he goes, when you listen to a singer, he said, listen to them sing the second chorus because that's where they prove themselves, is on the second chorus. And I thought, oh my God, you cannot come back. You can't come back to where you've been before without taking into account where you've just been. And of course, if you're playing live in a room with musicians, that just naturally happens. You don't have to worry about it. But in these days of Pro Tools, and people go, right, let's pick up the verse again, second verse, and they just plop it in.
That's not
And
composition. That might be arranging, but it's not composition.
yeah, I became
Composition.
obsessed with through composition. I start to think there is no structure. You start and you end here, and I really explored it, and I quite learned quite a lot once I put into my head the idea. Oh, this is through composed, so I don't have to go back. And then you start to realize it's impossible to do that because you create themes, and then the themes have to be referred to, but you refer to them naturally rather than just shoehorning. Oh, I'll have that section in there. I have what you're saying is profound stuff, and I feel like I'm getting a lesson because it's actually firing off thoughts in my head that are going, yeah, Roland's right. That is what is going on. This is a fascinating interview, and I can
Well,
tell
thank you.
you're a very good teacher because it's very gentle, but you are like in my mind pulling together stuff in my mind rather than trying to force something that I don't understand. You're just saying
Oh,
things and talking, and the dots are joining, and this is powerful things. Now I'm going to go off on a tangent again
okay.
because there's one drummer that I've never mentioned on nearly 1,000 videos, and he's an absolute huge influence on me, especially when it comes to Afro-Cuban drumming. It's the guy I learnt from out of a book, and I thought he was one of the most incredible drummers I've ever heard. And I'm going to take the risk that you may know this guy, and you might say, "No, I've never heard of him," but let's see. The drummer was Kim Plainfield.
Oh yeah, Kim's the monster. I did some conducting of a big band at the Drummers Collective, and he was teaching there then.
And could you tell a little bit because I think he passed away, didn't he, a few years ago? And I don't think he when I was a kid, I bought they had a book called Advanced Concepts, and he also had written a book on Afro-Cuban rhythms. He was playing with Tanya Maria, and that was where I studied Afro-Cuban was off Kim Plainfield. His method was unbelievably advanced. I could not
Oh, I gotta look
be,
for it. I remember the book.
yeah, well, his method was basically it came from what's that guy that did the new breed? The new breed. The thing was it was like these Afro-Cuban concepts, but it wasn't like one or two bar loops. He then had these sort of melodic lines, so you would have to study a certain concept and then try and play through the melodies with the concept he's got. It wasn't a set rhythm, you know.
You know who was there that was a major influence was Frankie Malaby. And
Yes, yes,
Frank,
he says this in the book.
yeah, he played with me at the end of his career, and he was so gentle, but he showed, he could play the songo and all those things on drum set and show you what Changuito and those guys had evolved in bringing the rumba conga stuff to drum set, which is really what everybody's doing now, whether it's Antonio Sanchez or these all these guys, Daniel Daphnis Prieto, El Negro, who's another one that I can't even keep up with who that guy is, and then Henry Cole, that's with Miguel Zanon. Oh
Mhm.
man! But that's what they're elaborating on the melodicization of clave. They're they're doing like the jazz drummers did, where there were Roy Haynes and all the people, Max Roach, that were elaborating the forms of melody and rhythmic impulse in the tune in their ideas that were making the basis of the groove. Well, that's what's happening in the Afro-Cuban drumming today, which I think is it's pretty amazing what these guys are playing. So Kim Plainfield, sweet guy. He was a little terse when I first met him, but he's all of those guys had something to offer. You know, there's just anyway.
Yeah, I
I'm gonna
mean,
come to
his
your
his
house.
his method. That was the guy I studied when I was coming up. It's one of the few books I actually really studied was his Advanced Concepts. And it's the first part was technique, the middle part was grooves, and he went through sort of linear grooves. But the Afro-Cuban bit and the sort of 6/8, there's a lot of 6/8 stuff in there as well. Songo. I mean, if I play a songo, that's a
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah,
know
yeah,
that's Kim. And there's
yeah,
another rhythm that I got from it, which was like bat to take a boom, bat da 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 to take a boom,
yeah,
bat ba ba da
yeah,
da.
yeah. Clave with the left hand.
And
Yeah.
that these rhythms were not necessarily like the one thing I got from him is that there is no established drum patterns because originally these were broken up and you've got congas, and so every drummer that's come across it has had to interpret an interpretation, and in that interpretation, there's different ways of interpreting. And I felt that there was a freedom of going, if you can assimilate the beat, and a lot of the time he said the fundamental beat is this, boom. He goes that you start
Hmm.
there. Uh,
Oh, you're
uh,
breaking. Yeah.
it was like these things that were that were much more internal, and then you just let your hands do what you want once you're in that zone because it wasn't set rhythms. Does that make sense? It
Don't
was,
say that. Well, it's more than what you want because the clave is. I was really castigated when I came to New York and we did our first gig at the Village Gate, and Ray Barretto was we were opening for him, and we played my music, and there was a lot of the pieces that had bars of 6/4 and stuff where the clave would flip, and I get this phone call the next day from Ray Barretto's publicist, read me out for 2 hours about how I was bastardizing the music and everything I was doing was wrong. And I said, listen, I came up playing rock and roll. I came up playing Smoke on the Water and James Brown, and that's
yeah.
those are my roots. I didn't come up in salsa bands. I'm coming to this. I was 30 years old, but it's like the understanding of the power of the clave and the sacredness of the two and the three that's essential to the worship of these ancient African cultures and pretty old Afro-Cuban cultures, because remember, they were here after the 1500s. So how long have they been there practicing playing rumba? And this survived in spite of the colonialization and the suppression. Although in Cuba, they were allowed to keep their Africanisms and the cabildos and the practice. Castro let them do their drumming. But I mean, so it isn't a just anything. We can take that approach, just like we talk about free music, and that can happen, but there's still that central core that is a time. It is a melody. Zonal, think of rhythm as melody and think of melody as motivic cohesion for the whole piece. So when we hear, what's your favorite melodic composers? I mean, and people say, well, Beethoven, no, I don't want to think about those old dead white guys, but there's so much wisdom. I mean, Marcus Roberts has done arrangements of piano concertos for his jazz group. I heard his band play Ode to Joy off book, a nonette at Bard. It blew me away. The detail that he brought from that music into this arrangement. There's greatness in architecture. And when architecture reflects the elements that hold the universe together, I don't care if you go to church or you don't, or how you practice your philosophy, but science. I tell my students 2 plus 2 is a principle and it's infinite. And that's all you need to know, because in the living principle of 2 plus 2, it's not about four. It's about the continuity of principle. Water. Where is water not water? Whether it's ice, steam, or water, it's always the same H2O, and it's infinite. So life that we see and we measure by counting leaves and measuring fruit, we get away from the essence, which is always moving, always in time, and always expressing infinite self.
That's I'm gonna try and add something in from my experience of 30 years teaching drums to this, because earlier on you said something was really interesting, that when you approach the drum you have to sort of be ready to play the drum. Okay, that thing that you said, and now you've talked about this sort of the the relationship of the clave to to being, basically. One of the things I noticed as a teacher, and it got to the point where people would come very often. They say, "Well, I've learnt the drums," but they go, "I just want to be able to just play them like you. You just seem to play them, and I can't do that. I need to have a structure." And then I said, "So you can't improvise?" They said, "Yeah, I find that really hard to do." And what I found is that if they cannot play dotted eighth notes properly, this is real technical now. If they couldn't play dotted eighth notes, they couldn't improvise. If they could, and when I say play, I mean feel dotted eighth notes. If they could feel dotted eighth notes, they could improvise. So I started to teach these people who couldn't improvise to feel dotted eighth notes. That's like tap your foot and then you have to clap a dotted eighth note going across. Now, of course, if you do that across a bar of 4/4, you naturally start to create sort of claves out of that. And the two, the 3/2 clave and the 2/3 clave, that they're like magical versions of it. And I think I know what it is. It's to do with syncopation and stresses within that bar of 4/4. Once they could feel it and play around with it, they could improvise because basically what they'd learned was to be able to feel the beat but not play the beat. In other words, they and I in doing this, I used to do a lot of when I used to do my drum clinics, I used to do a lot of advanced coordination stuff where I'd be holding all sorts of different rhythms down in one hand and one foot and doing playing over the top of them. That was my thing. And a lot of that to pull that together, you had to have claves in there to make it sound, or it's just sounding like noise. But when I was working on the coordination, you didn't have to go through every single possible combination and learn it. You just had to nail the dotted eighth notes. The dotted eighth notes were so important. And so I started to have this belief that I'd walk down the road, and if I was doing a 20-minute walk for the whole time, I would be singing my dotted eighth notes. Not even a clave, just like all the way, like, feeling that thing that all the way. And and I thought this is really, really important, but it's a basic thing, but people haven't noticed this. You come along and you've just placed that fundamental idea that I'm talking about as of actually being almost the embodiment of our being, but it's not. It's You have to learn to access it, don't you? It's not You're not born with it, are you? And this is the thing you're talking
Yes,
about, being literate as well.
you are born with it, but you aren't born with the connectivity. And I talk to my kids about the distance between here and this. And it's we're building neuron freedom when we're teaching our hands to go. That's we have to inform them, just like we inform Ned Sublett. I asked him about the drum. He said we were playing drums before we could phonate. The Upanishads say God taught man to talk through the drum. It's articulation that's after the humility, the curiosity, the willingness. Articulation becomes preparedness, and preparedness is language, is literacy.
This is profound stuff. I was once in like a junk shop and I saw this cassette tape and it was called The Story of Rhythm. I don't know what the hell it was. And I bought it, I put it on the car. The first thing was gorillas talking to each other, banging on trees. And I
Oh,
sat there listening to this going, this is the most beautiful rhythms I've heard, but also seemingly so removed from being music, almost being nature in itself. Because I've always felt that artists have to put a frame around nature. That's what they do when they create art. And there was barely a frame there, but it was also this was the right track to start off with. It was these gorillas going, I'm here. Are you here? And I'm over here. Oh, great, you're over there. It's like
and meaning.
it's the subjective and the objective in one, isn't it? It's like you sit in your internal being, the heartbeat, and all that. Then you start to play, and then everyone looks around and go, "Oh, it's like it's the communal, it's the individual and the communal. It's. I have never really understood this as profoundly as I have today after talking to you. And what I keep coming back to, Roland, is that at some point I clicked on probably Terminal Velocity, whatever that website is. It's got all the less well-known albums, and I thought, well, what's this one? I've gone through hundreds of
I
those.
don't
And
know
when I
it.
put your album on, I was like, what the hell's this? Wrote the name of it down. What's going
Oh,
on? What's being transmitted that would because of that? We're now having this conversation, and I cannot help but think I've been a lifelong atheist, but these things have made me think that there's like an ascendancy of our being. It's like we are the product of this material universe. We and
uh,
how far does it go up? It goes up further. There's an ascendancy of everything that comes together.
It
And
doesn't
where does
matter.
it ascend to? And I've thought it can only ascend to one place, and that is the one. It's the monad. That's what I found. It was the name for
Okay,
it. It's
good
called the
name,
monad,
monad.
but another word would be God.
Well,
That,
you can call him Ted or Gene if you want, as far
or
as
the
I'm concerned.
universe, or
Yeah,
everything.
well,
Yeah.
Orishas, the Santeria, their god is Olarun, and all of the Orishas are anthropomorphic manifestations that help us meet our challenges and manage ourselves in this world. But some student gave me a book on Ifa, which is the practice that they follow. And I opened the book by accident, and here's a page that says the original consciousness that came to Earth, its purpose was resurrection. So consciousness has existed before everything, before there was form, before there was stuff. And what we're coming back to, if we stay on the road, is the value of meaning. And when we see the gorillas and they're talking with each other, it's the meaning that they hear. Cornell University has this. Somebody I just read an article. They are the Juilliard of bird song. They're collecting millions and millions and millions of bird songs. There's a Japanese guy that's found that this one kind of sparrow, they go T T T when they're warning each other about hawks. And if a sparrow sings that, they all fly off. If they're eating, it doesn't matter. They go. It goes he when there's a snake. This researcher went there, simulated the sound. There was no hawk. The birds didn't go. It simulated the he sound. There was no snake. The birds didn't go. He goes there and simulates an image of a hawk or a shadow, gives them the sound. They go. Takes a stick and makes it look like a snake. They go, because there's a relationship in awareness between meaning, which is vocabulary or language, and action. And so when we're hearing the heart and the breath and the movement, watch the movie called Foley, Foli. The guy, the shaman there, the West African shaman says, there is no movement without rhythm. It's all in time. This little short film made by these Dutch guys. It's a brilliant piece. And it gives you the key to the continuity of the drumming, dance, and participation in community. Maybe we have no meaning except as we are a part of and serving community, becoming culture. We've been separated by the lie that money makes a man. Money's just a tool. Money doesn't make progress any more than nails make a house. A house is made by imagination and commitment, not by nails or wood. Money doesn't make stuff. And we're going to learn this because I don't know what it's going to cost to rebuild my hometown, but they're going to have to start somewhere. They spent $1 trillion looking for one guy that killed 5,000 people in 9/11. Here we have an experience where nature and negligence added up to how many families? 10,000 families that have lost everything. What are we willing to spend as a community in this country? I mean, you guys went through a whole different experience in World War II where you had to come together and had to identify as a nation and had to accept the responsibility, but you had a gift. I think Queen Elizabeth, whatever the goods or bads were, she represented a foundational point and had dignity. Maybe people would convict her of crimes. I don't know, but I think there was a state of mind that was there,
I'm, I'm a I'm
helped people.
I'm a very patriotic man. Anyone who watches my channel, and I get accused of all sorts of things because of that. But the fact is that when the Queen comes out and they have a big ceremony for her, what they're actually looking at is a Victorian vision of how much Britain could beat people up in the old days. All those soldiers walking past with their swords, and they're all like this, and they got the big plumes on their head. That originally was like, don't mess with England, we will kill you. That's what that is. And
Well,
that's what the Queen represents. But there's a dialectic because within that history is a compromise and tolerance that leads us to sort of the liberal ideas of tolerance, the sort of Western Enlightenment ideas. And a lot of people who are sort of a bit religiously minded, they can't take the fact that that exists in England, that you've got that sort of colonial empire. But the fact is that there's good and bad there. And the good within English culture and English history, which is the development of sort of refinement of democracy, of seeing people as human beings. I mean, the reason why the slave trade stopped was because of Enlightenment thinking in the UK. It would just became that you couldn't justify this idea that these people were a slave class, which Plato had put forth. And I think those ideas, you don't throw those out because you go, what? Why did they think that? I know they were a bunch of racists back then and they were all like this and they're trying to beat up and cologne. But also that within that emerges this idea. And it's the same thing with jazz in America. Within that Jim Crow post-slavery period, which I've studied inside out and I know so well, out of that comes jazz. And it embodies in itself the idea of community, but also individuality, the very thing we've been talking about. That's embodied in jazz. It's amped up. It's amped up. It's like, and the whole of 20th century popular music has been selling the idea that couldn't have existed in classical music or folk music, that Madonna is Madonna, and that Prince is Prince, and Michael Jackson is Michael Jackson. And people don't understand what an incredible thing that is. Because before then, every opera singer and violinist sort of had to conform to a certain sound that was within the sort of totalitarian system that was required to create that beautiful music. But jazz does music at that level without having to, Duke Ellington didn't arrange a chord. He arranged it for Bubba Myler and Johnny Hodges and Paul Gonzalez. That is your arrangement. I know I'm telling you stuff but if you've got Nathan East on bass, you go, oh, Nathan will probably do something brilliant there, and I'm going
no,
to
no, it's
write that
all on
into
the
the
page.
chart.
It's on the page.
Yeah,
And the parts that we did a
do
show
what you want, Nathan.
in Michigan in the 90s, and I wrote the whole book of that period of the Further Dance album. I wrote stuff for Anthony, and the
Oh, what
parts
a bass
and
player!
after that were specifically written for him. And somebody came to me after the show, said, Anthony wrote those bass parts, right? And Anthony was right there, and he just shook his head, and the because I wrote them, and he improvises within the form, within the house. But to get into the house, you have to take the responsibility of the community ceremony. You have to, you're going to walk in. If Buddha was down the block, we'd probably have to pay some dues to get there. Egberto Gismonti went from studying with Nadia, what's her name, Boulanger, went back to Brazil, went into the rainforest and sat outside a shaman's place for days before he was taken in and shown whatever secrets. I think that became a great power in his music. One of the great composers,
He's,
Egberto Gismonti.
he is like a virtuoso guitarist that plays a guitar with something like 58 strings on it, and you think, what the hell's going on there? He's an incredible pianist. His rhythmical approach is incredible. His melodic approach is incredible, but he often will deal in simplicity. A little bit like Hermeto Pascale. He's the other guy that's like that.
Yeah,
I watched Hermeto the other day and he was lying on his back breathing. It was a
I
composition. That was
know.
all he was doing.
He's
It's
crazy.
like if he has a bath, it's a
I
composition. And it
know that piece.
was.
I know that piece. That's nuts.
What is
That's
going on? And then
that's performance.
everything that you have said about these populations, these cultures that you have drawn to, and then when I start to think of Egberto Gismonti or Hermeto Pascal, they are dealing with this. What you've described, they're dealing with this at a profound level. It's incredibly advanced. Like that's the thing. That's the thing to join the club or open the door to go in. Can you imagine being in Hermeto's band and having to play that stuff?
Brazil is
Yeah.
read the book 1493 by Thomas Mann. He says Brazil may be 4/5 Quilombo people, the people that were marginalized, that were mixed blood, that were former slaves. They built their cultures up along the rivers, and that continuity. They haven't killed all the indigenous people yet, and that's one of the things. I mean, I'll say this. One of the stories I tell my class when I talk about my indigeneity is a boy would go hunt with his father in the forest, but every time they went to the forest, the father would stop. And one day the boy says, "Dad, what are you waiting for? To hear a deer?" And the father looked at him and said, "No, son, I'm waiting for the forest to give me permission to enter." That's the difference between indigenous culture and the commodified mindset that took Europe out of its mysticism for a great part. I mean, I think whatever came from Calvinism that turned into brutalizing everybody and justifying, the empire of we're better than it really is,
Mm.
what this is the overturning of a moral anti-history, because all along the way there are these individualities like you talk about that were the great teachers in England, the great teachers in France, the humanists that spoke to the equity of everybody, and principle, and that law and government needed to be able to support the needs of the people. It's not just a bank for a couple of guys, but I want you to write some music for me.
No, I've got about 40 albums I've made. I've got a big band camp full of all the music I've made, and then I've worked, probably recorded about 100 albums over the years with
When can
different
I
artists.
hear it?
Yeah, I'm all over the place. I am. I mean, this is the funny thing in doing the YouTube because I've spent 40 years making music. I've played with all sorts of different people, toured and doing all this, and then I start doing this YouTube, and it's wonderful because this was just like me going, I know I'm a musician, but we're all music fans, really, when that's what we all are. So I start talking about music, it starts to get out there. I didn't really understand why the channel was growing, and I had to work out what I was doing, and then start to understand that. And now I'm getting to a situation where people are going, well, Andy is actually a musician, and well, thing is, what's happening is they're coming to my music with love because I don't think it's that great, And all my whole career, I thought if I was any good, I would have got more well known, but I wasn't that
No,
good.
no, 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 no. Remember how Bach was. And you cannot look at any single piece of music. I tell my
Yeah,
students
I'm
that
not Bart though. I
discourage.
know this.
No, but we're
I'm
not
pretty
comparing.
confident.
Comparison is death. Comparison is death.
Yeah, totally right. Yeah.
And if you look at the first page of Goldberg Variations, everything you need to know about Western music is on that one page, the aria. And then listen to Stevie Wonder's Blame It on the Sun. And then listen to Equinox. And then listen to Speak No Evil. And you have what you need to move forward.
Mm.
And your own music is your own story.
You're a
It's
proper teacher, you are, Roland. I mean, I've been a teacher for like 30 odd years, right? And I know there's an aspect of that on my channel, and I have a lot of thoughts. And it's very rare that I meet somebody, all the greats I've had it with. I mean, God, I did an interview with Scott Henderson. And I felt like I should have paid him at the end of the interview because he said one thing to me that just blew me away because I was talking about improvising and soloing and stuff, and he just turned around and he goes, when you're soloing, what you're trying to do? And I said, I don't know, get some to some point, reach some climax, get to a point where I've brought the stuff up there, and he just went, don't do that.
wow.
And I was like, you could see on the video, I go, oh my God, and the point he was making, if you want that, it's the Zen thing. Don't aim for it because you can't make that happen. The only way it's going to happen, and if it's not happen, it's not happening, and it's
Got to go that way.
But then Scott, I mean, because Scott's my favorite guitarist. You see, Scott Henderson's
Oh,
such a balance of all the things I love, and I took him. I went to see him play at Ronnie Scott's, and afterwards he came out, and it was such an honor for him to go. Andy, was that any good? Of
oh,
course it was. It's like what you say,
yeah.
to me, because it's you cannot love with this music without being humbled by it. You cannot learn about these players without seeing the distance between you and them getting bigger. The more you study Coltrane or Monk or Duke Ellington or the King Louis Armstrong, the king, the
Yeah.
genius. And the more you realize what that guy did and how easy it was, like falling off a log, Charlie Parker falling off a log. And this is the
Yeah.
in talking to you, I'm fired up now. You can tell I'm fired up, and you are a great teacher. Now I know you've made lots of brilliant
Oh,
music, but you have the teachers are so much more important. Like, you are a great teacher. I have learnt so much in this, and you haven't done it by standing there being the boss telling me everything. You've egged me along. We have found connections. You've found the connections with me, and just two drummers talking. This has felt like a drum lesson, because I have had a problem with my drumming recently. This hand I've wrecked because I played some jazz. I was trying too hard. I wanted it to be what it wasn't. I wasn't ready. And I hurt my hand, and now I can't play. And then I'm thinking, can I play anymore? Andy, you're getting older. You're not haven't got the chops you had. You can't do it. And this is plaguing me at the moment. And in talking to you, I realize all I've got to do is sit down and let the waters still and go for the rhythm, go for the groove. Stop thinking about the speed and the notes and Elvin Jones and can I play like this and whatever. I'm going to go back in, and I'm just going to play. I'm going to start from the groove up.
inhabit your breath. Be willing to check out acupuncture and some body work that helps to restore the chi to your hand. This bicep fell off in 1994 and they had to put it back on. And the guy said, "Oh, it'll be a piece of cake. We'll reattach it up here."
Yeah.
Gets in there. He says, "Oh my God." And I said, "What? I can go home. I was under a local in my neck." He said, "No, just hang on." He gets out the drill, drills a hole in my humerus and tacks it off back here. He says, "You're done playing." I said, "No, I'm not." But I mean, we'll have a talk sometime about all the experiences, and this shouldn't be published. But I had a double craniotomy from a motorcycle accident. I had my hips replaced. I've had so many things happen to this body, and the whole thing now is to inhabit the breath, accept what your hands will do, and be with them. You have to be with them. And there are ways to strengthen self. Being old is being old, but it has to do with accepting age as opposed to recognizing it as a force, like rocks coming down a canyon.
Mm.
They're going to come down. And if you try and stop them, you'll get run over. But if you step to the side, they're going to, you'll be okay. But I highly recommend acupuncture if you find somebody that knows what they're doing
I
to
had to have that
restore
many
the
years
chi.
ago. I got into a situation in where I had a bunch of pain from playing, because people don't understand what drumming is like. But I'll finish with a story that happened to a friend of mine that he had a exact similar problem with his arm that you had, and he went to the doctors, and they very simply fixed it. They got in there and fixed it, and when they said we've done it, he turned around and said, will I be able to play the piano? And they went, yeah, you should be able to. And he said, that's brilliant because I couldn't play it before.
that's that's that humor. And look at indigenous
I'm
culture.
naughty. I can't help it.
I love
It's like
it.
I
I
thought
love
if
it.
this has
Come
been so
on.
profound, and I
It's
thought
irony.
and then you'll laugh you'll laugh at that as because I pulled you in a little bit. You go, oh yeah, Andy's going to come up, and I think this is so important at our moment in time culturally that we realize that art is fun. I was watching. There's a British film called Saturday Night Sunday Morning, and it was really changed British culture when it came out. And it was about this sort of Jack the Lad. He's going around sleeping with people's wives and doing all this and getting drunk and all this sort of stuff. And he starts off and he goes, "I just want to have a good time." He goes, "The rest is propaganda."
That's right.
And I thought, wow, it's so profound.
Well, read the ancient Chinese philosophers. There was a whole period in there where they would just lay around in the pig pens and drink sake and spout ideas. They had abandoned the Confucian model, which was working for the state
Yeah.
and being a magistrate and a judge and a teacher. They were just like looking for acceptance, and so I don't know where they fit, but I remember reading those guys, and it was like, wow, there was a an allowing. There's nothing you can do about the force that is the Tao or is the Buddha or is the Christ. You can step back and experience it, and maybe some of it will rub off.
Oh,
You
it's
know,
it's you. That reminds me of in the West. Where does that reside? right? And I heard a story about Miles Davis. He was in a studio once, and one of the musicians said, "Can you count off? I'm not sure the tempo of this. Can you count it off?" And Miles went, "Sure."
Ah, there it is. There it
We,
is.
we've got to the end now, Roland, and you're coming back on. That's the thing I hate about my channel is I do this. I get in touch with people. You know, the amount of people that I've spoken to, and we're all unified by something. And I talk to people. It feels like I've known them all my life, and it's because I don't know what is going on here. And
It's
the
consciousness. It's
it,
consciousness.
and this has been one of those things again, and it's been really strange because I was a bit nervous. I thought because normally if I'm interviewing Billy Cobham, I know Billy Cobham, I've listened to him, and that's frightening. But you've gone the right path. You have
Well,
gone the
thank
right
you.
path. That's what I feel. You are an enlightened being.
Oh,
That's what
I
I think. That's what I feel.
so one more story. So my one of my teachers told me, well, after Buddha had his enlightenment, he was walking down the road and somebody passed him and said, "Who are you? What are you? Who are you?" And Buddha said, "I'm awake." So as we really listen, whether it's to Cecil or Brand X, I mean, listen to what is it, Elephant Talk? Bruford. Oh
Yeah.
my God. And that's got humor in it, but it's still got that groove that's like take you down, you know? But we have all of these great drummers to listen to. In fact, I have a friend that I think knows where Eric Gravatt is living now in Minnesota. So we need to get you at least to have his address so you can talk to him.
Oh my God, Eric Gravatt.
This is
I've just got I've been talking about this album on my channel. I don't know if you know, it's by Julian Priester, and it's called Love Love, and it's
yeah.
got Eric Gravatt on drums and
I
on
didn't know that
Dougal.
until I saw it on your best of
Wow.
one.
And Eric Gravatt, um, his swing is his jazz. I just want to find the
Oh,
album because it's a bit like Alphonse Mouzon. I knew Alphonse Mouzon from all the disco stuff in the 70s, and then you hear him in McCoy Tyne, and you realise, my God, the swing of that. Alphonse could swing as like one of the greatest. And I was listening to it, and Eric Gravatt, or it could be Nduga, I don't know. I'm not thinking because it's got two drummers. I'm thinking who's swinging like this, and it's like free jazz. But the thing I loved about it is really avant-garde. There's no time, but the time actually starts to come in naturally, as though and then this swing comes in, and it's polyrhythmical. It's not actually the tempo what everyone's doing,
that sounds
but
like
it
Eric.
is. Yeah,
If
it's
you
just
listen,
unbelievable.
listen to Directions Take One on YouTube. That's a studio recording. It's unbelievable. He plays stuff in there I can't even figure out what it is, but he displaces the time, and it's just it's swinging so hard. And his that's what I saw of playing I mean the Tony Williams cymbal, but with this funk and Afro stuff in his hands and feet. That was I've never seen anybody do that.
Because I last few, but like let's say the last 10 years, I've been working on a thing in my right hand, so that I'm trying to draw every little bit of tension out, and you start to realize that the way Tony Williams plays a ride cymbal is not the way I'm playing a ride cymbal, because he is basically just dropping the stick on,
Right.
it's another Zen thing, right? And I've been fiddling on this the other day, and I was practicing it, and then I brought my pad up, my practice, and I'm hitting like this. I think, oh my God, that's easier. And then I thought, oh, Eric Gravatt, the vertical ride cymbal. And
We
you
all
you
did
think
that for
it's
a
an
while.
affectation, you think it's just Eric's,
No.
but no, it's not, like it's just the way he plays. He might be onto something there.
It was a gravitational thing.
Yeah, because it's like it evens up. Because the thing with drumming, of course, is like I used to say to my students that when you hit, it's not that going that way is not the problem. That's the problem. You've got to learn, you've so that you've got
Yeah, yeah,
that going
yeah.
on, and then that coming on. And so I work on this a lot. And then the more I've studied it, and this is part of where I got my history of jazz, because I started to realize that drumming is jazz drumming, kit drumming is kit drumming. And you start to look at the history of it, and you start to realize where that comes from, and then a lot of the techniques we use in jazz are coming from the Civil War drummers. American Civil War drummers that had developed what became Moeller technique, and Moeller technique is really about getting out the way of the front end of the stick, that type of thing. And I've been working on this a lot, and then Eric Gravatt keeps popping up into my mind at the moment. I thought, why does this guy disappear? What? Because
He left because look at Tony
he
Biondi.
deliberately disappeared. Like, even though I don't know this because I don't know any
Well, he went to
biography.
work. He went to work in the prison facilities, and I just say this. Wow, there's too many things I want to say,
Yeah,
and I know I don't have time. But Eric left. Sal Cuevas did the same thing from the salsa world. My first experience playing in a prison, that's a whole story I got to share with you,
yeah,
where
yeah.
the word inclusion, because of the riot that tried to happen, and something said to me, "Is there a player?" And Sal, who was sending them back to their cells for throwing chairs, said, "What?" I said, "Is there a player?" And the guys in the front row, who I thought were going to kill us, said, "Yeah, Tito, get Tito. Where's Tito?" And they pushed this guy up on the stage. It's got keloid scars in his neck from bullet wounds and stuff. And he never looked at me. He always looked at my shoes, which in East LA, that's a fight or flight mechanism. He sits down on the congas. I face him with my hi hat and I said, "Avanza." Start playing time. The whole place, which had been ready to, riot, they were throwing chairs in the back, blew up like a room full of 12-year-old boys screaming. And it came into my mind, my God, where there's inclusion, there's dignity. And
Well,
dignity is,
when Louis Armstrong stopped a civil war in Africa, they were
that's right.
about to have a civil war, and he was booked to visit there. And basically, the country was too ashamed to have a civil war with Louis Armstrong turning up. Think about that. A guy that was a waif off the streets of New Orleans stopped a civil war. And that's
Oh,
why I say he's the greatest of all the musicians, because Louis Armstrong did magic. He was the biggest black film star in Hollywood. He was
yeah.
the first black film star to get, above the title. He had hit records in every single decade, and he was still performing the best pop songs right up until he died. He was on film soundtracks. The guy did absolutely everything. And then you look at his trumpet playing. Was he good? Yeah, he was the best because his playing style, everybody went, we're going to play like that. He just was the blueprint for everything that we want to be. Like you saying, and I think after talking to you, I realized I've always stressed the importance of music. But what I've got from this is the music is us. It's the representation of us. You're right. It's not about money and ownership. It's the representation of us. And somebody like Louis Armstrong has so much spunk, I
Love.
think is the only way to describe it. There's so
No,
much
no,
juice
it's
there.
love. It's love.
Yeah.
It's love. It's
But
love.
it's hot. It's yeah.
He
It's
was on
it's
fire. He was on fire. The love was what the love was just pouring out of him.
every interview I'm doing with musicians who are any good. Yesterday, who did I interview yesterday? Martin Speake, he's in a bit of a trouble in the UK, brilliant jazz musician. Every time the interviews now are ending with us talking about love, and me and Martin actually had tears in our eyes. This is really what music's about. It's the esoteric heart of music, and all the crap that surrounds it has to be there. It's because it's this dialectic. The surrounding of it is awful, but
Andy, go to the beach, drag a magnet through the sand on a string, and what happens? The magnet, the force, the duality of the magnet collects the negativity. It collects the vibration that can be collected. So this world, this dimension is duality. It's plus and minus, positive and negative, karma, cause and effect. But that isn't principle. Every principle you can name, just think 2 plus 2 is enough. That exists completely and eternally where it lives. And there's no way you can divide it or separate it from itself. So when we are thinking about spirit, it's the same thing. The great teacher in the United States, Mary Baker Eddy, said the things of God, life, truth, and love, are immutable and cannot be divided. life, truth, and love. But truth is the fulcrum. And that's what you're doing when you're figuring out the symbol and sharing. I mean, I got to come to England and have a lesson with you, man. You got to teach me some stuff on the drum set. I want to,
I won't.
lesson?
I won't. I mean, I could talk about it, but we need to wrap this one up because it's
Okay,
too. This is too like. This is like
I
a
got it.
nuclear
Thank you.
reactor of an interview. This one is. So I think we'll give him a break now. You lot can go and have a cup of tea now. Where are you? You lot can go and have your cup of tea. Me and Roland we will have a chat about it. I'm going to tell him about where I got with my technique because I know quite a lot about drum technique because I went on a journey. It's very interesting what happened. And it doesn't mean I'm the best drummer in the world. I'm not saying I won't. I will talk about it later.
You're
Anyway,
the best Andy. You're the best Andy.
I am
Best
that.
Andy. You can't be another thing. You
Yeah,
can be the.
there's a bloke called Andy Edwards that plays for this football team in the UK.
I
I'm
saw
better
that.
than him without a doubt. I'm always googling. I
Can
Google
he play
myself, and when
Songo?
he's above me, I don't like it.
Can he play Songo? Can he play Songo?
Well, he can kick a football
Uh,
better than me. That's all. I often wonder if you must know who I am. You know that. You know he must know who I am. That the other Andy Edwards who played for Southend United. If you're interested, you know. And if anybody out there knows
I
Andy Edwards
love
who played for
soccer.
Southend
I'm
United,
coming to your house. You're gonna go. We're gonna go to a soccer game.
yeah, I don't know anything about football. I'm the
Oh, you don't
worst
go?
because yeah, it's like musicians unless you like Rod Stewart or Robert Plant. They're the only
Well,
two
let's go.
musicians who
Let's go
actually
to
like
Ronnie
football.
Scott's. I wanted to be. I have to go there before I die. They'll never call me to play there. It's fine. They got Vinny. I'll just go and listen.
Well, there's a couple of people who have promised me, you know, like Simon Phillips said when he comes over
No,
that he's
Simon.
gonna, you know, so if you want to come over and come down and meet Simon Phillips because he can play the drums.
Oh, I know. I know. He played a lot with Anthony. They were in
Yeah,
that. What was their
Hiromi,
name?
God,
Yeah.
anyway, I love chatting to you. This has been brilliant. So all the links for Roland are down below. I know you lot are going to check it out, especially the people who are funky and groovy, and they like the juice. They like to feel the juice. Go and listen to Roland's stuff because he's got juice in abundance without a doubt, and I really enjoyed this. I love the I love I love the heavy metaphysical and then the laughs. When you've got that, it's the best day going. I thank you so much.
You.
What else? Like, subscribe, join in the club. All the best musicians are here at Andy Edwards. We're all gathering together. And this, in a couple of years' time, I will own it all. I will own it all. All my heroes will have to bow down to me. I will have attained what I
Support this
need.
guy. Support him. Support him.
World domination. That's what we're going. World domination through the knowledge of jazz. Right. So, thank you all, and I love you all, Roland. Absolutely brilliant. What we're going to do now is we're going to try and say goodbye. So, here in the UK, we had a TV show called Player where they always waved at the end. Bye bye everybody. Bye bye.
Bye
Bye
bye,
bye
everybody.
everybody. Bye bye.